urgency in our conversation tonight. Instead of just assuming, oh, it's just another chit-chat about marriage and another story, although that'd be wonderful, we are just all too aware, it is in our face, how high the stakes are in every day of our marriages at this point. In each of our families, we're walking with people who, so in my family and in Megan's family, with just marital dysfunction that has gone ignored or denied or unaddressed for a couple decades, and the way that it's just the dominoes are falling, it just is really nasty. And it's really heartbreaking, and it's really harmful, and it's really sad. And so this is a conversation that we think there's a lot of urgency to, and we want to make sure that all of us in this room aren't just assuming everything is okay, but we're really trying to be sober-minded and vigilant about what God has given us in our marriages, with our kids. And so that's kind of why we're here tonight, to share a little bit about what we've been reflecting on in our own life and our own story. Is that okay?
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Do I need to, can y'all hear this time?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do these microphones. So I wanted to start on a happy note, and then Aaron said we had to start with that. So,
We just hold it.
do that thing back that way. Thanks. So we have been a part of Grace. I realize a lot of you guys are from different places, but we've been a part of this church for over a decade. And Aaron leads worship here and travels around, and we started a nonprofit to train worship leaders from around the world. We have 4 children, and they are all boys, which is exciting. And they are 15, 14, 10, and 8. And we've been married for 17 years. And those are some of the basics that we wanted to just throw out there. But before we start, I wanted to know how many of you guys have kids that are in elementary school? Okay, does anybody have middle schoolers? Few? Any high schoolers? Few? Okay. All right. Just wondered what the crowd was here. Okay, so in looking at our story, last year we kind of told you guys, we kind of started through when we met and all these happy things, but since we're not going to start so happy,
You can do it, man. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. But as we were thinking, so we got married straight out of college, and then a few months in, we got pregnant, had our first kid, and then the next year had our second. And so, it's like marriage, child. So that all happened like super fast. And then we moved to Atlanta, or to this area. We changed jobs. So we had this big whirlwind that all happened pretty quickly in our marriage. So by the time we reached year 7, which you hear about the 7-year itch or whatever, year 7 was just like a huge wake-up call for us. So we're like, what has happened? Like, we have gotten married, we have all these kids, we're in a different place, we're not with our family, and it was just total chaos. And it was just a time for us to stop and say, like, okay, what are we doing? Like, who are we? What has happened? Where are we going? So it's in that season, in that year, that as we were reflecting, that a lot of stuff came to the surface for us. And we started realizing, for me personally, I realized that I was trying to be someone that I wasn't, because I thought that's what he wanted. So I remember early in our marriage, I was like trying to learn how to sing and play and do these things, like to be musical like he was. And that was not working out for me. It was so stressful. And then
It really wasn't working.
and then his vocabulary was so wonderful. I remember I had put a dictionary by my bed, and I would try to learn new words all the time, thinking if I could come up with new words that would impress him. It's ridiculous. He never wanted me to do this, but I didn't know who I was. All I knew was that I was in some crazy whirlwind, and I had these kids everywhere, and I was trying to stay married, but I had no idea who I was. So in that season, it was this huge time for me, for us, to say, okay, wait, like, who am I? who did God make me, Megan, to be? Not who am I trying to be for my husband? And that's totally not working out, and we're both disappointed in that. So that was a big wake-up call. Do you want to speak into? I know you're perfect. Kind of in that season. Is that good enough? Okay. I'm just giving you a few little ahas for me, just in case they resonate with where you are or where you were. Another thing was communication. So I'm an extrovert, and Aaron's an introvert.
I'm like on the spectrum introvert, you know, like.
No, but he's really introverted. And so we didn't know this. I didn't know this until we got married. And then so the first many years of our marriage, I thought he didn't like me because I'm like, you talk to everyone else, and we come home and you're in the bedroom hiding or something. Like, what is wrong with me? And so after years and years, and then finally people starting to help us speak into our life, we realized, oh, it's just our personality. But no one had ever brought that to our attention, that the way we're made, our personality type, really affects how you communicate. So we spent the first 7 years of our marriage, at least, with this is kind of how our argument would go. I would be sort of, something would happen, and I would probably not think about it for a minute, and I would explode into some very dramatic, loud something. And Aaron would kind of look at me and walk out of the room. And so then I would get more mad, and then I would follow him, and I would continue yelling at him until he responded, which he would never would. And then it would be like 2 days later, and I was like, are we ever going to talk about anything? So that did not work. I know you can't imagine that, but it did not work. So just a season of us evaluating, okay, it's so important to know how you communicate. I mean, right? Do you need, some time to think about what you're going to say? For me, I've had to learn to stop and, maybe even write out what I was thinking about instead of exploding. And then we set some time limits, like, okay, so you need like how long, and then you can come back, and then we can have this conversation. And so now we don't, 17 years in, we don't think about it that much, but it's still how we're made. And I still have to consciously be like, okay, hold your words for a few minutes, give him some time, and then he has to process quicker, perhaps, than he would like. So personality type was huge for us, recognizing just walking in who we are and who God made us to be was massive for us as well.
Yeah, and maybe part of the identity and personality stuff, there's congruence in that we need to know our own needs. One of the biggest things I think I've learned in marriage and through counseling and reading and learning is that it's up to each individual to know what you feel and to communicate that. It's not up to Megan to know what I feel. It's unfair for me to expect her to know what I need. It's up to me to be emotionally literate enough to be able to articulate that, to name it, and then to be able to articulate it. And for a long time, I wasn't that way. I think I was, and I think a lot of men in our culture are kind of emotionally constipated today. Like we don't know. We're not supposed to feel. And we're shut down from an early age. Pretty much in our culture with don't cry, like boys don't cry or whatever. Not just that one emotion of sadness or whatever, but when I just look at the life of Jesus, I see an abundant emotional life. So I see him rejoicing greatly, it says. Rejoicing greatly, full of the Holy Spirit. That's some verse. Like, I would love to have seen what that looked like. When Jesus rejoiced greatly, full of the Holy Spirit. It's in Luke. And then obviously we know of 2 different times when Jesus wept, right? He wept over Jerusalem. He wept over Lazarus. So I see in Jesus this beautiful, dynamic, emotional agility and emotional fluency. And in my own life, I'm a thinker. I'm not only an introvert, like autistically introverted. I am a thinker, and I have some feeler in me as an artist. I think God gave me that, but I have so much thinker in me that I have to think my way into what I feel. So if Megan asks me, well, what do you feel? I'll tell her, well, I think this. And I don't even recognize that I'm doing it. Our counselor is the one who's pointed that out. Like, do you realize you responded to a feeling question with a thinking answer? I'm like, I did not realize that. And so learning to if you're wired as a thinker, to allow yourself to figure out how can I get in touch with what I feel. But for you feelers, to feel your way into what you need to be thinking too. It has to go both ways, but it's been really important for us to learn what we ourselves need and communicate that instead of just resent each other for not giving us what we haven't even communicated that we needed in the first place. Does that make sense? In terms of stepping into what God's called me to be and what God's called Megan to be, that's been a pretty important part of it. It's just emotional health, really, right? Like just knowing yourself. It's just really hard to love your neighbor as yourself if you don't even know yourself. Like you need to know yourself, you need to love yourself so that you can love someone else. And maybe one of the reasons we love each other so poorly is because we love ourselves so poorly and know ourselves so shallowly. So just to think through, like, how can we be better at being fluent with what we feel and not being trapped in that, but also not being afraid of that. I'll just keep going. You can cut me off. So a few years ago, I was at a songwriter retreat in Nashville, all these songwriters, and there's this an Anglican priest kind of facilitating this prayer time. And this guy was amazing. He was an author and he's a speaker, and he led this time, and it was so beautiful. And this is probably 6 or 7 years ago now. So we had preschoolers. And I just remember I was a mess emotionally because I was like, my walk with God is like a joke compared to what it was before I had kids. When we first got married, Megan was teaching every day, doing a master's degree at night, and I was spending 8 hours a day like studying the Bible and worshiping. I call it my honeymoon with God. Like we first get married, and she's gone all day from 6 a.m. until some nights like 9 p.m. And I would get all this day for like Bible study and writing songs and worship and stuff. And then we had kids. And it's like everything just changed, the sex life is different. Like Megan was going to bed with a taser, like not even going close. Is that too TMI? Is that too much everything just gets flipped upside down. All of a sudden it's like, no offense, but she's shopping at like Tarps R Us and that kind of, it's just like, well, am I going to get in trouble?
You're your own self. You're responsible for all that.
There's just so much transition and so much, everything gets flipped upside down. So little help in knowing how to be in that season. And so I really feel like I've dug myself into a hole, sorry.
Go back to Ian Morgan.
Yeah, so at this event, I was talking to this priest, and I'm saying, look, I have these 4 kids, and I don't get time with God like I used to. 8 hours. I'm lucky to get 8 minutes, like studying the Bible or whatever, and I needed that, I missed that. My soul needed it. And he sent me an email, and I thought I would read this to you. It's just a couple sentences that I copied, but I thought this was so helpful for me. Maybe it'll be helpful for you. He said, it's very hard to be a father of young ones while juggling a million other responsibilities. It's a great season of life, but it's exhausting. And this is what was helpful. He said, I wish I'd been more self-compassionate when my kids were little. I realize now the hours I spent playing Legos were themselves a prayer as pleasing to God as any other. Isn't that beautiful? And so he challenged me to not miss the season that I was in, longing for a different season, but to recognize what it would look like to meet with God in the season that I'm in, and to be grateful for the season that I had. But to see what would it look like just to be with God right here playing Legos with my kids. So I can't probably get hours and hours a day anymore like I used to, but we can throw the baseball and talk now, and ask them about how school's going and these kinds of things. So just trying to recognize what season we're in, and jump in here anytime or I'll just keep going. But then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll tell you, baby. was Buddy, the pastor of this church, the guy who started this church, who passed away 2 weeks ago. Buddy, one of the best things Buddy ever challenged me on was the difference between a river and a swamp. And he said, you know, we were trying to figure out how much time should my band be on the road, how much time I need to be home, and how do we do all this, and how do you want to work it out when I first started working here 17 years ago. And he said, you know, you gotta know the difference between a river and a swamp. What does that mean, buddy? You know, his cryptic little aphorisms. And he said, rivers have boundaries, they stay on their boundaries, and they bring beauty and life. Swamps have no boundaries, they overflow any boundaries that they did have, and they bring stench and death. He said, you have to name your boundaries, figure out what season of life are you in, and stay in those boundaries. If there's a river in your backyard, your real estate is going to be really nice. Your value, your property value. If there's a swamp in your backyard, your property value is going to be going the wrong direction. So, like, what are we doing with our souls, with our work, with travel? For me, when I had little kids, like, I look back now and realize I didn't respect the boundaries that I should have in a lot of ways. I don't think with 4 little kids I should have been on a tour bus a whole bunch, you know? There's probably a better season of life for that than 4 little kids. So we're trying to do better now about recognizing the season that we're in and respecting those boundaries that we're in. And so within the boundary conversation that is the identity conversation too, because just recognizing, like, what has God wired me for? What has God wired Megan for? And if there are things that I can flourish in and what God's wired me for, let's figure out how to prioritize those things. As opposed to, let's say yes to everything and just hustle and drive ourselves into the ground. Because one of the things that, as I look back on our marriage, like, I want our marriage to be something that makes Megan's dreams come true. Like, I want her dreams to come true because we're married. So if she has dreams of writing a book, I want to make sure that she writes a book. If she, you know, had a dream of seeing the Eiffel Tower, then I want to make sure that she sees the Eiffel Tower. I want to help make her dreams come true. She helps make my dreams come true. But until we can know those things and name those things, I think we'll only ever be disappointed. But we can't blame anyone except ourselves if we're just constantly living in disappointment. We might need to just take a look inside and go, why do I feel the way that I do? And if you're a thinker like me, that might be harder than you think, pun intended, to get to the bottom of. So, like, I have to, every day I write down 3 pages longhand in the morning. I just have to write. And often my pages are, what do I feel? I feel blank because blank. I'll just fill up pages on that now. And it's been very helpful for me to let stuff start to flow again so that I'm not constantly, because that stuff is in you, whether or not you're acknowledging it. Anger or despair or sadness, these moods, whatever it is, it's in there. Are we even aware of it? Are we thinking, are we processing it? Are we giving it to the Lord? Are we bringing our spouse into it? Or are we just oblivious to it? Because I think what we've seen in 2 cases recently, like I started out with, is that deal with it now or deal with it later. You're going to deal with it. And it's going to be a lot less damaging if you deal with it sooner than later. Rivers wind, rivers erode, and it's not a canal. This thing might do this over the next 10 years, you know, the seasons of life and all the opportunities that God brings you. But really, really helpful for me to start to recognize, what does it look like to love God with this bank in the river, with a 15-year-old down to an 8-year-old? What does it look like to love God 17 years into marriage, living in Snellville, and not to put pressure on myself to love God in someone else's season of life or in some season that I'm not even in right now? Does that make sense? So that's been kind of a help for me.